Welcome to another episode of Well, Don't Tell the Kids. I'm Janet Lee, your host, and today I'm joined by the Reverend Dr. Marjorie G-S. I want to thank you very much for joining me today, Marjorie.
And I want to thank you very much for saying my name so beautifully because it is a very long and difficult name.
Marjorie is an Episcopal priest and the rector of Grace Episcopal Church in New Hampshire. And Marjorie and her husband, Brent, are busy raising 2 young children. Now, I see that you are originally actually from Long Island in New York. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. And I actually just went back and touchstoned with my family last week and saw shows. But the nature of my work as a clergy person, I'm juggling many different things, church, work, family, so I don't get to touchstone and go home all that much, but when I do, it's really a lovely thing to do. I am a New Yorker, and I love New York, and that will never leave my heart.
I went to school with some folks from Long Island and New York City and New York in general, and I went to school in the Midwest, and they were very, very vocal about their loyalties to New York. And then I see that you made a little tour through the South, and I'm curious about how that unrolled itself.
Actually, I, native New Yorker, one of 4 children, also, as you mentioned, an Episcopal priest, so faith is very important to me. And when it came time to go to school and college specifically, I had always wanted to go to Dartmouth. My father and my grandfather had gone to Dartmouth, so I thought I would get in legacy-wise. But I did not do standardized testing very well, so I didn't end up in New Hampshire at least then, so I'm here now. So my second choice was a place called the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee. So I spent 4 years in the Deep South, and that was a huge gift to me too, though a very different way of life, I will say.
I can imagine that there would be a great contrast. Is there something that sticks out in your mind, thinking back to the contrast between New England and the South?
I think one of the things that was different about living in the South is when I went to college, one of the first conversations I had was with a friend, another woman, and I said, why are you coming here? What are you looking for, in your educational process? And she said, well, I'm here for my MRS degree. And I honestly, Janet, went totally blonde. And I said, is that music, religion, science? And she said, no, I'm here to find a man, a husband. And my 4 years of college, while it was wonderful and profitable and educational in so many ways, I was the only girl, really, of all my close friends who graduated without a ring on her finger. So that was really interesting, growing up in New York, never feeling that I had to get married right away, but definitely when I went down south, marriage was very important, and faith was really important. I will say it's really hard to pastor in New Hampshire. I tie my state where I live in with Vermont for the worst church attendance in the nation. It's just not a place where really people are drawn into faith communities, whereas the South, everybody went to church on Sunday, and everybody, for the most part, went to church on campus. Everybody was told, when we were in choir, hey, you can get drunk on Saturday, but you still have to be in church on Sunday. It was an Episcopal school, I will say that. There was a dominating presence on the campus of All Saints Chapel. But I just hear when I talk with colleagues who are in my profession that the churches in Texas, in the South, people still go to church. It's still part of their patterning and their life circle reality, whereas not so much up here. So people generally come and find me when there's a crisis. And occasionally, thankfully, when there's a joy, when there's a baby that's born or they need somebody to do their wedding. But generally people come to the church now, at least, where I serve up here for services, for kind of what I call the meat and potatoes of faith, the baptism and then the marrying and the burying.
The Vermonters and the New Hampshire folks are famously independent and vocal.
It's interesting, having lived first in New York, as you mentioned, and then in Tennessee. And then I actually, upon graduating from graduate school, was recruited to Ohio, lived in Cincinnati, which is not really the South, but I did find there a reality where I was never really fully accepted into the community. Cincinnati is a place where you pretty much have to be born and raised in order to be accepted into the culture. Mark Twain actually wrote, I'm probably not quoting it perfectly, if the world comes to an end, Cincinnati will know 30 years later. So it was a very more traditional, people still belong to country clubs, at least the people I circulate with, not everyone. But I didn't really feel fully accepted or embraced when I was in Cincinnati. Now, when I moved to Washington, D.C., which is where I met you, I think that's a place where it's kind of a central location, obviously, of our nation. And there's a lot of transition, people going in and out, flowing. So I really felt accepted there. I have really close friends from there. New Hampshire, we have loved living here, but it is New England. It is hard to get to know people. People I connect with in community and parish, I love that they're very honest. They have that New England kind of say what we're going to say reality. But it's been hard to make friends here. My husband and I, we often joke, we sometimes feel like we're on an island with our two kids, trying to raise them. And part of it is, I think, the nature of life where we're all just so busy working. My profession, I'm pretty much for my life in my profession. Doesn't mean that people aren't nice here. It just means you have to really work to get friends. So recently I've actually joined in September. The local museum has a pottery class, and I now throw pottery every week, and I have a whole circle of friendship reality. I just love it. It's people, some of whom are Jewish, some of people are not religious, and it's just great to now have a circle of friends within the community, but not directly involved with work or anything else. That's professional related.
I know that you have some very interesting hobbies, and I would want to touch on that, but I wanted to share an excerpt because I also know that, of course, you write a lot for your Sundays, but also there's a poem that is award-winning as well. And I just wanted to share, if you don't mind, a little bit of the beginning of it.
Not at all.
Born into the world an introvert, age 0 to 7, I chose not to speak. Whispering into my older brother's ear, he told others what I wanted to hear, and eat, and see, and do. But then, at 8, a great desire surged inside, no longer a will to hide, but a deep hungering for words to be heard. I just found that very compelling that you journeyed from essentially a silent childhood from 0 to 7, and then entering into a vocation of minister, which of course is quite vocal in nature. And so I was just curious, looking back, was there a season or a moment or in time where your call, what was that like when your call overcame your reticence in general to speak?
I think it was, obviously, as it said there, I saw a very clear divide in my life, and people who know me now are very surprised to hear about that 7 period when that poem was published within my parish community, and it was actually written not initially for the parish community, but to win a scholarship for a professional opportunity, which I was gifted, and I'm very blessed to be going to that conference this summer. But the interesting thing about publishing it was I had about 5 people come to me privately or email me and say, that was very brave what you did, to kind of admit
very
that.
Brave.
Yeah, very brave
courageous.
For you to say that, courageous. We never really knew that about you. But my early years, I was extremely introverted. I do remember in about 2nd grade, which later on the poem says, there was this moment of enlightenment, our Buddhist friends would call it, or the light bulb going off, where I went, wow, I noticed that girls within my class who raise their hand, who are really vocal, they get more attention from the teacher. I want to get more attention. I'm going to have to work on this. And so over many years, I started doing things that were really frightening, getting up and reading in church, or getting up and singing a solo, or eventually going into theater and speaking. But right at the age of 12, when I was at an Episcopal day school, another teacher voiced, actually another priest, that women could be clergy, and it just hit my heart. Like, that's exactly what I want to do. And there are not many moments, I think, in our life when we have that that jarring experience of I know exactly what I want to do. I think a lot of our lives is lived kind of like I hope I'm doing the right thing, or I hope I'm saying the right thing to my kid, or I hope I'm making the right decision about my future. But there's very few moments in life where we go, I exactly know what I want to do. And I had that moment when I was 12 when he said it, it just kind of struck my heart, and I thought, that's exactly what I want to do. It's hard when you don't have those moments. My own 9-year-old, almost 10-year-old is going through some really hard stuff where her brother's automatically good at everything. He's automatically gifted at everything. He seems to know, I'm good at math, I'm good at this, I'm good at singing, I'm good at acting, I'm good at... She doesn't know yet. And I said, hey, it's okay you don't know. You're only 9. You may not discover your passion until you're 20 or until you're, I'm 47 and I'm just figuring out now I like to, throw pottery on a wheel. It's an ongoing search to know and to figure out what we're supposed to be doing with our lives. So I was really lucky that I figured it out at 12. Are there still moments now when I think, holy cow, why did I choose this profession? I'm crazy? Absolutely. But I think we all do that with our own jobs, right? We all sit there and go, what if I had been whatever? Would it have been better?
Well, I think with your daughter, I don't know her too well, but I think when she becomes 29, 39, 49, and she recounts her 9-year-old self, people are going to be like, really? I don't know. She just seems, to me, pretty determined.
She is a very determined child. I think it's the frustration is she has that kind of hunger and fire and desire to be something great. I think we hopefully all have that. Not all of us do, though. I was at a parishioner's house yesterday for lunch, and he's lost his 3rd nephew, niece to the drug addiction reality of our local city of Manchester, which makes the news regularly, particularly in the political scene. And we talked about how that child, whose name was David, really had no hunger to do anything but be selfish. And that was a really interesting dialogue to have. Like, how do you get people to want to be other-centered or to want to accomplish something great? I think we kind of assume everybody has that in them, but not everybody does.
And I think that can cause a lot of anxiety and stress on folks who they're in touch with their authentic self somehow, even very young, and they're like, well, I don't want to press forward in a quote-unquote type A kind of path. I kind of want to garden or something like that, but the world says, hey, it's not okay to sit still. Don't sit still. Keep running, or keep doing. And maybe that plays into some of the socioeconomic things that are happening up in your neck of the woods there, perhaps.
I think that what you just said is a very astute observation. I remember towards the very beginning of my ministry, I was in grad school and worked at a church on Long Island, and I had a teenage girl who was about 13, and she said to me at one point, Marjorie, it's just so hard to be ordinary. She was this kid who, B- and no real activities. And I do think our world today kind of insists on this rat race mentality. I don't think it was that way with my parents, or it was okay if one parent stayed home and, just did laundry. Now it's kind of, there's this competition element of, can we be better than the Joneses?
The whites whiter, the laundry.
It's a very different reality than when I was down, Jen and I were both colleagues in a faith setting in a school and church community in D.C., and that had a very different energy and vibe. It was very much, a lot of wealthy people, a lot of pressure on these kids who were in a private school, whereas my reality now is totally other in terms of most of the parents who are parents of children at my kids' day school, many of them are on welfare, many of them are single mothers. They're struggling. It's just a whole different reality up here. We're much more kind of in the gritty city reality. And it's interesting because my ministry back in D.C. was very rich and fruitful, but I was exposed to a lot of people in a single day. I'd probably see about anywhere from 500 to 1,000 people a day in my walk through my day job. Here it's harder because I don't see as many people, so it's hard to feel like I'm impacting at the level that I did in my previous job in D.C. So people tell me I'm impacting them, but it doesn't feel that I'm impacting. When you go into a room like I did at my last job and there's 400 kids, and you're speaking to 400 kids, you feel really impactful, whereas you walk into church here at an 8 o'clock service and there's 20 people. They're sitting there going, wow, the sermon that I worked hard on is only impacting 20 people, whereas the sermon I worked hard on in D.C. was impacting sometimes 500 people, sometimes, 700 people at a larger scale event at the school where I served. So,
well, I would say that the underlying humanity common between where you are in D.C. would be the same poverty, the same not physical poverty, but the poverty of the soul that we all feel. I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, from the rich CEO to the person on welfare who's trying to make it through the day. We all are trying to make it through the day in some respect.
That is also another astute observation. I will agree with that, that we're all kind of hungering for a sense of peace, a sense of security, a sense of love, a sense of acceptance, and it doesn't matter whether you have tons and tons of money or you are just kind of going paycheck to paycheck, which is, a lot of what I'm living and seeing here. The reality is, people still have the same cares and concerns. Can I feed my family? Can I have a rich and fruitful life?
What do you see as a pressing concern for a contemporary society that we might mark as a priority? But I think you may have touched on that. Is there anything else that pops to mind?
My pressing concern, if I had to name one, because I think we should only name one, is the lack of mentoring. I just don't see the level of mentoring that occurred. Again, I go back to, we always say the grass is always greener 50 years ago, but I just feel like with the up in Facebook, not that I'm against Facebook because I use it regularly, of Twitter, of texting, of messaging, of any of these forms, we have lost that kind of face-to-face contact with people. And I see it on all levels. I see it with children who are just kind of hungering for more adults to kind of surround them and engage them. And I see it with my own parishioners who all kind of clamor for a piece of me, and, want to spend time with me, and there's only so much of me to go around. I'm mentoring right now a young woman who's thinking about going into my profession and just doesn't know how to navigate the system. And I've heard that in other venues, people who are college professors who kids don't know how to write an essay, or they don't know how to navigate a graduate school degree, or have a conversation with somebody at Joann's Fabrics, and the kid was on full scholarship at the Fashion Institute in New York and never read the fine print. If he went to Japan for 3 months and came back, he would have lost the scholarship. I just feel like there's not enough watchful eyes and people kind of watching over everybody who've been kind of become more isolated and more independent and more kind of self-absorbed, I guess. Not as other-centered, or how can I help that person go where they need to go. We're more kind of like, how do we get where I want to go?
Just shifting gears a little bit, I'm going to say 3 words. These are centered around your hobbies. When I see them, I'm like, oh, that's very interesting that you should pick these 3. You enjoy puppeteering,
yes,
knitting, and pottery, or creating ceramics.
Yes. So the puppetry, I will say, is a little less now. Again, my community is, if you came to my church, gray hairs. Not so much anymore, though I still love them, but I know when I pull out the puppetry, people kind of roll their eyes and go, oh, God, here's the kooky priest. I still love puppetry. I think it's part of what I saw emerge when I was more active in my previous job with it, is giving people the ability to be creative who are really frightened, as I was as a child, to be on stage. It's much easier to put a puppet on your hand and then hide behind a black sheet and puppets. People don't know it's you down there, but you can still perform. And I loved being a puppet mister at my last job. I had these kids who were kind of the geeky nerd kids, and they had really no place or passion, and they became the rock stars of the school because they were on the puppet team, and they learned how to do really interesting, creative things with the puppet, and it gave them a place and a face, which was really cool. And I love puppetry, and I'm just fascinated with it. I'm addicted to any kind of movie or show that has puppetry, and I'm always kind of pointing it out and coaching my kids on it. As for knitting, I find it to be very calming and repetitive, and I am, like you referenced, in the midst of the rat race and always kind of running. I find it fascinating that we clergy say, pray and be quiet and do this and do that, and then we never model that behavior. So
it's kind of like doctors who smoke out on their break outside.
Yeah, exactly. So the knitting for me is very relaxing. I also find it's really powerful to see when you give a gift that you've made yourself, how powerful that is, that you've invested the time. People are always kind of floored when I give gifts like that, particularly people who are ill or people I don't know very well. The local Dunkin' Donuts that I go to occasionally, there was a young man working there, and he had his first child, and I brought him 2 hats, and I think he was kind of stunned that somebody he didn't know very well reached out to him in that way. So I love the kind of repetitive, calming reality of the knitting and the fact that I'm creating something that's out of me to give to somebody else. So, and the pottery is similar, though I think the addiction for me with pottery, and I will say it is an addiction, is there's this moment where you put the clay on the wheel. And I actually learned this not from the main teacher of the center, but the students who taught me as much as the teacher. And one of my dear friends in the pottery class said to me, you're going to put your hands on the clay. It's going to feel like an earthquake. Your hands are going to be shaking, 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 shaking. And all of a sudden, it's going to go calm. And that's when it's centered. So there's this moment when that happens in the clay. And it's indescribable. You just kind of have to do it. And when you do it, you're like, oh, the world is wonderful and all is at peace. So that's kind of an addiction to do that. And then again, to see something created. And what fascinates me about pottery and with knitting or anything that people make is I can take the same poundage lump type of clay, put it on my wheel, throw it, and mine is not going to look like my friend Andy's or my friend Jody's or my friend Chelsea's. Everybody has, it just kind of emerges in a certain way. Mine are my bowls are kind of round, and they're not as angled. They have kind of a soft side. They kind of mirror in a lot of ways my soul and how I try to control my world, by being soft, by being, gentle, by being a comfort to people. So whereas my friend Jody, who's just super wonderful, super organized, tutors kids, her bowls are just precise and perfect and angular. And I don't think I would love to make a Jody bowl, but I don't think I ever will make a Jody bowl. That's just not who I am.
Well, it has your own fingerprints, your own tracks through the...
It does. And I will say I did take up the pottery because I have a really dear friend who used to live in New Hampshire, now doesn't, named Charles LaFond. He's a wonderful Episcopal priest, and he threw pottery, and I looked at that and went, gosh, I would love to learn how to do that. And there's a line I saw somewhere, I repeat it to people, the characteristics you see in others you strengthen in yourself. I saw that he was a really gifted potter, and he was wonderfully welcoming when we moved here to New Hampshire. We didn't get any invitations from any other clergy person to go to their house except Charles. Charles brought us to his house in the woods, and he had a big dog, which my kids at the time were 3 and 4 loved, and he had a little studio, and he had all 4 of us throw clay. Oh, wow. And that moment really kind of marked me as like, wow, so he welcomed us, had us for dinner, and we still have those kind of somewhat ugly creations, which he then placed inspired.
Those 2 caps to the person in the Dunkin' Donuts, and just the gift of your own making. Something.
And in turn, when he was leaving New Hampshire, he had a big party He used to do this great party. I miss it. It was called the Naughty or Nice Party. So you brought a Yankee swap. Of course, we're in New England. And, of course, the naughty gifts were very naughty, some of them. Some gifts were nice, but my husband bought him a gift that night, and my husband actually crochets and is quite good, and had brought him a blanket. And we walked in, and Charles started crying because he had made thousands of bowls and mugs for other people, and nobody had ever made him anything. Very powerful. The characteristics you see in others, you strengthen in yourself. See it in my own children. My daughter her spirit animal is the sloth. She adores sloths. She is really good at being relaxed. Some people might call it lazy. Sometimes I do call it lazy. We're cautious about what our children hear, right?
That's
Evidence,
right.
the title of this
That's
this
right.
podcast,
Well, don't tell the kids.
But she is very slothful, But the thing is, that is something to be admired on my part because I am not slothful. And I feel like the Christian faith community just went through, as you know, a period called Lent, where we try to take on different habits to improve our spirituality. And my habit, actually, it sounds kind of crazy, was to be more lazy during Lent, to spend more time at the pottery studio, to have more mommy timeouts. And I really succeeded in that. I didn't read any great works of spiritual, reality or, invent 10 prayers or do anything. But it was probably the best Lent I've ever had because I was gentle to myself. And I'm not very gentle with myself. And I don't think any of us are really gentle with ourselves as much as we should be.
And also, probably in the beginning, it was a bit of a struggle. It part of your Lenten discipline itself. It probably felt like a struggle.
It is hard to, I think, you and I are both, as you mentioned previously, we do have a reality of adopting a type A personality and feeling like we have to do. It is really hard to kind of say, you know what, I can do less, and that's still fine. Another colleague, friend of ours, Andrea Martin, her husband, gifted me a phrase which I say to myself all the time when I write my sermons: don't get it right, get it written, because we can kind of agonize over what we're going to say.
Right, get it written.
Don't get it right, get it written. But he worked for a think tank. They had standing meetings, so meetings would only be 10 minutes long, so you really had to be on target. But he says to her all the time, don't get it right, get it written. And I try to say that to myself. That has definitely changed in the time that I've been here in New Hampshire. I would get really snippy sometimes with my kids, and they would come up and say, hey, can you come play a game with me or take a break from your sermon? And in the long run, I think, I'm going to work on the sermon for several hours. It's going to be done in 10 minutes. Who actually is going to remember it? But my children will remember when I took a break and I spent time with them. They'll remember that more than anybody will remember some dumb sermon I wrote. So.
Well, I don't know about you. Get a little bit of argument from me, as I remember some of your doozies. But you do have a point. That it's never wasted time to be with your children. But I wanted to thank you for your insights and your conversation, Marjorie. And this is about all the time we have for now.
That's wonderful, and I want to thank you for the firsts are very important. We always remember our first. This is my very first podcast, so I want to thank you for that. I'll never forget you for that. So
your words will carry on because, the Internet's forever. And thank you all for listening. My guest today has been the Reverend Dr. Marjorie Gerbracht-Stagnero, and I'm Janet Lee. Please stay tuned for more episodes of Well, Don't Tell the Kids.